At the start of the movie, a boy named Rick is running behind his school bus. Because he got to school late today, the bus stops a ways away, and Rick runs into it. As he tries to get on the bus, he bumps into the stop sign and even the door. He had bad luck today. As soon as he got on the bus, his friends wouldn't let him sit with them. Everyone was sorry, but they couldn't let him sit with them. Then he saw his friend, who invited him to sit with him. After he gets on the bus, he sees a girl and her friend sitting behind him. She was the girl that Rick likes. He likes her and calls her Jill. But when Rick's friend sees him, he tells him to stop because he will never get her. She already has a friend, and then their school went on a science trip. When they get there, they see a bird on a branch. Jill was looking at the bird, and Rick took a picture of it. The flash sets the bird on fire, but no one has seen it. Rick was blowing on the fire with his foot when the burned bird fell down. In all of this, he steps on Jill's friend. And, angry, he says, "How dare you hit me?" Jill comes along and stops them. At the same time, the CEO of a scientific place shows up. He puts his hand on his shoulder and tells him to stop fighting. Everyone was moving forward, but Rick notices that the CEO doesn't look too good. He also has a cough and is bleeding. Rick asks, "Are you okay?" He says, "Yes, I'm fine, bleeding isn't a big deal." The CEO asks Rick how his parents are doing. Rick tells him that they aren't there anymore, and the students move on, and get close to a room with dragonflies, where one of the dragonflies chases Rick. It bites him on the neck, and when Rick gets home, he lives with his old uncle and aunt. He had trouble getting around, and his body was swollen. Then, his uncle told him to feed the fish, but as soon as he opened the aquarium, he got sick. He pukes there and then goes back to his room to sit. His uncle comes up behind him and tells him that it's normal to have mood swings as you get older. Rick falls asleep as soon as he hits the bed. The CEO is shown sitting in his electric chair and talking about his ideas. Then he gets some shocks from electricity. There was a man standing nearby, and he held his hand so that his soul would go to the CEO. The CEO will now live a long time. Everyone is scared when they see this, and then Rick comes to his senses. He starts searching on Google when he turns on his computer. Dragonfly bite means he wants to know what happened after the dragonfly bit him. He could feel changes in his body, and then he got a message that Professor X had added him as a friend. There was also a message that said, "I know all the answers, and if you can't find me, I'll find you." In the meantime, he sees a picture of his father. He was looking at it and missing his dad. He tells his father, "You left very quickly, and when we got to school the next morning, there was a science fair. Stephen Hawking was one of the guests, and Rick also goes there. He says, 'Look at me, I can't even walk, and I want your life. I wish I could go to that place.'" The students are now on their own, and as Rick was walking, he saw Jill, who caught his attention. Because of this, he runs into Jill's friend. He tells him to be careful, moves forward, and starts to drink water. He puts his hand on a board, but it doesn't move. He lets go of his hand and looks at the small hairs on it. His hands are sticky, and when he tries to pull his hand away from the box sticks to his hand as well. Because of a jerk, he hits Jill's friend. There was a fight, and during it, Rick fell on Stephen Hawking's wheelchair. He also gets hurt and falls into the beehive because of it. When the bees came out, there was a lot of commotion among the students. Rick moves out and finds that he can walk on the building. Even with sticky hands, he can jump, and his body has become flexible. He looks like Spider-Man and comes across a truck going too fast on the road. An old woman and her dog were standing in front of the truck. Rick moves to help them and immediately shoves the old woman and her dog. The truck also comes to a stop, which made everyone look at him. Rick thinks they might like him, but when he turns around, he sees that the woman is stuck in a dumper. She was standing next to her dog, who was also hanging. Rick goes home, and when he gets there, his uncle and his best friend are already there. Rick easily catches the nail that his uncle throws at him. His uncle tells him, "Rick, you seem different," and he answers quickly. He attacks Rick and hits him with a knife because he tried something new. But when the knife bends, it doesn't hurt Rick, and they find out he has superpowers. Rick hears strange sounds coming from a nearby house. This is Jill's house, and she comes out just as her friend is pulling up to get her. As she's leaving, she tells Rick, I'll go on a drive with you, too. Rick looks at his bike and thinks, how about I take her for a ride on my bike? Then his cycle breaks and falls to the ground. Rick has no chance of meeting Jill because he doesn't have any other way to take her for a drive. When Rick gets home, he gets a video call from Professor X. The video call then ended, and there was an ad saying that you could get a loan for a car. Rick is happy, so he goes to the bank with his uncle and aunt to get a loan. In the meantime, the thieves show up and start to rob the bank. Rick goes outside and sees a crowd. A small monkey is doing tricks for the crowd. His uncle's body was nearby, so he ran to check on him, but luckily, he was still alive. Then his uncle asks, Rick, are you a good boy? Rick says no, I have no idea. When the medical team shows up, Rick's uncle is taken to the hospital. We see the CEO in his office, and then his assistant comes in. In this case, the CEO wasn't in good shape and felt weak. He holds the hand of his assistant and gets stronger as he kills her. Then he puts her body in the closet. Rick is seen with his uncle, and then he decides he wants to meet Professor X. When he went to meet him, Professor X took him to the school for kids with special needs. Professor X told Rick that he is a special child. He tells him he has a lot of powers and can even fly with them. Professor X was also in a wheelchair, and he met his wife while he was there. Both of them were in wheelchairs, and they started talking. Then his wife brought him a small baby who didn't look like a boy but more like a toy. He, too, was in a wheelchair, and he put his small hands up to his head. Then, using telekinesis, he flies Professor X through the air. Later, his wife appears in front of Rick and tells him, you came to school without a costume. You have to make a costume for yourself if you want to be a superhero. Rick makes his costume, which is green and has a black dragonfly on it. He came up with this idea after the dragonfly bit him, and then he moved to the roof. He was sitting there, but then a man in blue shows up and tells them to stand up because that's my place. Rick says, come sit with me and we can talk. Rick goes to an office to interview for a job. He puts on his costume and starts throwing punches, but the boss wasn't impressed. When the man shows up, he tells them that there are police outside the school where they study. Rick goes missing, and the CEO shows up where the kids study, while wearing a red and black costume and carrying a box on his arm. Now he has come here to take the blood of young people, the serum that will keep him young, and Rick also gets there dressed as a dragonfly. Now, they were fighting, and Jill was also there to watch. As their fight gets worse, the CEO throws knives at him. His costume was so strong, though, that he didn't get hurt. He was no longer in danger of dying. Later, the fight is over because the CEO sneaks out of the office. Rick follows Jill as she leaves the theater at night and tries to talk to her. Jill came here to try out for the movie role. Rick asks her how she is doing. Jill gives her flowers and says just this as she does so. I thought you might have something else to say. Rick doesn't say anything because he's shy. Then she leaves, not knowing who the man in the dragonfly costume is. She likes and was impressed by the man dressed as a dragonfly. As she moves forward, bad people make fun of her. As soon as Rick sees this, he comes back in his dragonfly outfit. He saves Jill from the bad guys, and Jill falls in love with him, like she was telling him thank you. On the other side, the CEO is seen doing work at home. He finds out that he needs to take 47,000 lives in order to live forever. He has to get their powers, and then he can't die. The CEO gets to work on it right away. At a party, it is shown that Rick is the one who invited Jill to her house. Jill comes to town and makes friends with Rick's aunt. She told her that she has feelings for the dragonfly man. It looks like I like him. At the same time, Jill's friend and uncle show up. On the other side, Rick is seen wearing the dragonfly costume as he goes to his room. Before he can change into his real clothes, the CEO comes to see him. He doesn't believe that Rick is the dragonfly man, because Rick hides on the roof of his room. The CEO sees a bright side, but he hides in a drawer and tricks the CEO as he looks for him. The CEO goes downstairs because he is tired, and then Rick walks in. Rick had just changed his clothes and was coming inside. Here, the CEO sees that Rick's hands and lips are hurt. He asks him where he's coming from, and Rick says, I'm coming from a fight with a boy. The CEO thinks Rick is a dragonfly, but Rick doesn't care. Then Jill's friend went home, and Rick and Jill talked about dragonflies. Here, the CEO, whose name is Hourglass and who is dressed in black and red, comes and tries to attack them. He says, "I must kill 1,000 people," and tries to go on, but Rick was about to attack him, but he slipped and fell down. Then Hourglass kills their aunt by going to her house. Here, she dies, and Rick's uncle is shown in the hospital, where he comes back to himself. The doctor forbade any other doctor from telling him bad news, but another doctor does. That your wife has died and that her funeral will be the next day. Her husband was there as well. He moves in with his wife inside a coffin, but he doesn't know that it's not his wife's coffin, but that it was coming. People were carrying the coffin, but when the door opened, his wife fell out. There was a fire where his wife had fallen, and the fire burned her. Rick is sad and sitting alone in his house after a while, and has messed up his house. He also has a beard, and his uncle and Rick's friend show up at his house now and then. In this scene, his uncle gives him a ring and tells him to do what it says. You have to live by what it says. On the ring, the words honor, dignity, pride, commitment, duty, and health care were written. Rick says, "I know I have to do what they say, and now I want to be a superhero, too. I don't know what to do," and that made everyone worry. Hourglass said he would go to a ceremony where thousands of people would be there. He will make them strong by taking their lives. At the same time, there was news on TV that there would be a convention with a lot of people. Rick finds out that this is where the event will take place. He moves there not knowing that the CEO's name is Hourglass. He asks the CEO who Hourglass is. He looks around and sees a monk talking to the kids. He tells Rick that the monk is there. Rick goes and beats the monk, and while he's doing it, the CEO runs away. As he walks away, he turns on his electric chair and throws the roof at Rick. He was dressed as a dragonfly, and Rick used his power to take the roof off of him. There was a strange thing that happened when the roof fell on him again. The blades were about to be thrown at Rick by Hourglass. Rick is in trouble, but Jill saves him. She was cut by the knife, and Rick doesn't know what to do. He goes upstairs, where the word Hourglass is written on a chair. He makes it easy for Jill to use the chair. Jill thanks him, and they look at the screen and see that there are only 10 seconds left before Hourglass becomes immortal. They try to stop him, and Hourglass throws blades at him, but Rick uses a backflip to get away. Then he brings him fuel that blows up. Here, the CEO dies, but he was saved by the dragonfly's strong costume. On the other side, the explosion also makes Jill fall a long way. Now, Rick and Jill were both falling off the building. When Jill trips and falls, she sees the ring in Rick's hand. So, she finds out that Rick comes from a powerful family. Here, they say how much they love each other. The movie ends here.